welcome back to the EGOS map. In this video, we will focus on teams and how to develop solid high-performance teams. So obviously there must be some kind of difference between a group and a team, right? So let's get a better understanding of these differences. Well, to begin with, typically a group has a goal that has been set by the organization, right? Whereas a team always has some kind of goal that must be also set by the organization, but it also sets goals for itself. So there's some kind of pride, some kind of sense of ownership of its future. Another difference is the responsibilities. Typically in a group, each person assumes only individual responsibilities, whereas in a team, obviously, each one also does his or her own work, but they also feel responsible for the overall results. And when it comes to information sharing, obviously in most groups you find that people tend to keep information to themselves, even if they think that maybe the other one will benefit from it. Whereas in a team, you will likely find people willing to share that information and hope that others will also share the information that they have with them. So there's much more information being built around the project or the team. Another interesting difference is communication. Typically groups meet and then they decide, and then they communicate, they convey whatever they have to say. Whereas in teams, you find that communication is an ongoing exercise. They share information, they send some emails to each other, they call, and they also have meetings, obviously. Decision making typically takes place in the meetings, and then each one gets individual tasks to perform. Whereas in a team, decision making also takes place in meetings, but people then check who can help each other in putting those decisions in place. And the results are obviously, measured individually in groups, whereas in a team, the priority is to measure the collective result, the outcome of the team effort, and only then comes the assessment of the individual results. What pulls everybody together in a group? The fact that they have to join efforts in a specific project or process. Whereas in a team, what binds people together is actually mutual trust. They trust each other. That's why it's so easy to share information, it's so easy to communicate anytime, because there's a sense of, okay, I can depend on them, they can depend on me, and I'm here for them, they are here for me. So in this sense, teams are made. They're not born as teams. So how is the development from a group to a team? Well, it undergoes 4 stages, 4 development stages, okay, until it becomes a high-performance team. What are those stages? Well, in the first 2 stages, they are still a group. It starts well, the curve goes up, everybody thinks that it's going to go well, maybe it's a new group, people are working together for the first time. So in the creation stage, things seem to be well underway. But then comes the second stage, friction, where they realize that, well, actually, we're not really able to work well together. We thought it would be just, natural for all of us to interact well, but I don't really agree with that one, or my way of proceeding is not really the same as the other one, and we disagree on many things. So this friction stage takes the team, or the group, in this case, the group down. Now, in too many cases, in companies that I've worked with, we find companies stuck in bad performance levels precisely because they're in the friction stage and they are not able to get out of it. So it requires more than just time for a group to become a team. It actually requires a better understanding of how to overcome those friction difficulties. And once it becomes clear how to get out of this friction stage, starts the normalization stage, the first one where they're already becoming a team. And in this normalization stage, norms are set, which means now they understand better how to work well with each other, how to adapt to one another, and what kind of norms should be set for everybody. What works best for the team. And as they put those norms to test and as they realize that it works, they reach the final stage, which is action in the sense of high performance action, a high performance team. So these 4 stages do not come naturally. They are a development process that every group has to undergo, and not all groups actually finish the process. Some are split in between, in the middle, in the friction stage. So make sure to understand that this is a process that undergoes these 4 stages, so that you realize, okay, now we're just in the 2nd stage. It's normal to have some friction, and we will overcome it if we understand how to go over to the normalization stage. Also, it's interesting to realize that in each development stage, different EGOS profiles tend to assume a distinct preponderance. So in the first stage, in the creation, typically most team members are still in an let's say, approach, because they're waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, right? Can be a professor in a university, can be the leader in a corporate context. Then comes the friction stage, and here you find lots of E characteristics. People who are not even entrepreneur eventually get stuck in the friction and also develop a little bit of competitiveness and fight for their own arguments and so on. And in the normalization stage, as you would expect, the G characteristics get clearer as people set norms and obey the norms and check whether they work and so on. And when those norms are well put in place, then the last stage works really well and people are really friends with each other. They gather personally, not just professionally. So it's a really social stage where feelings are very strong. Okay, so understand that this is a process and that it's normal to have difficulties in between, but that there's a sequence that should be understood and well put in place. What's also interesting is to realize that once you put each team member on the EGOS map, the joint EGOS map clearly reveals in which development stage the team is. So what we do with companies is actually to check first individual EGOS maps and put them together, and then we take a closer look at it and we realize, aha, these are the difficulties, these are the problems, or this is what's going on quite well, and it's obvious in which development stage this team or this company is. So let's take a look at an example, a real example. So this was an industrial company that we worked with, and this company was having difficulties. Sales were declining, they were having losses, and they hired a new leader, and the new leader was actually quite experienced. But 1 year after this new leader came in, the losses had actually increased. So that's when they realized there must be something wrong, not just with leadership, right? So we checked obviously for the strategic orientation, which seemed quite correct. And then we looked at the people, at the organization, right, at the leadership team to begin with, and we realized that they were all scattered around the EGOS map. So as you can see, there are 4 people in the pure EGOS profile. So 1 pure E, 1 pure G, 1 pure O, 1 pure social. So this is not usual. So such polarization, that's a technical word. So everybody was working together, but not really as a team. They were clearly a group. And there was too much infighting that is also evident from this kind of polarization. So they were in the friction stage. So we helped them realize what were the difficulties, and we helped them overcome those difficulties. And 6 months later, this was the new EGOS map. And 4 years later, the same team, the same leaders, had achieved not just record sales and profits, but even world leadership in their business. So the point here is that you can have really competent people working together, but that doesn't mean that they will achieve high results. They actually have to work well together. They have to complement each other. They have to fit each other. In this case, the leader was required to get back a little bit to the G profile. This is an industrial company, so obviously the G culture is predominant, and he had to kind of control a little bit more how things were being done, and also get more social. He was not so social at the beginning, so that people will get around him and create an atmosphere where people could actually become more of a team and less of a work group. And eventually, over time, people started trusting the new leader more, and as each individual had to deal with his or her own difficulties, and that was done either in group sessions or individually in coaching work, they started unconsciously even getting closer and closer, and they became much more cohesive. Okay, and this is how they became eventually, a few years later, world leaders. Let me share another example. This is from a sales company, and this one has a leader that was very autocratic, so very pushy. You know, it has to be my way. But sales companies frequently have a social culture. And as you can see, all sales directors from different regions were in the S profile. So this leader was solid, intelligent, but she was too tough. And she was making everybody else kind of afraid of her, or having difficulties put whatever she said that must be done in place. Well, once it became clear that she was actually the real focus of the problems, and it takes time for leaders to realize that they are the reason behind the difficulties, but eventually she accepted this kind of conclusion, and she changed. And once she changed and became more social, obviously, so getting to the ES position, things started moving around. The leader's changes usually have a huge impact on the team's change, right? So initially this group, because it was a group obviously, was stuck in the creation friction stage. The leader was very authoritarian, and it became quite well positioned in the normalization stage in a few months. So once again, it's not enough to have competent people. You have to make them work well together. Now, these are top level teams, right? So the top culture and leadership issues must be well addressed, but you also have lower level teams, right? Which undertake specific functions. So let's go over to the representation of the functions on the EGOS map. Take the example of marketing. Marketing is an E function, which means that you have to look for new customers, new products, new campaigns, advertising campaigns, new initiatives. So you always have to come up with something new. Strategy and R&D are also E functions. But it's not enough to have an E profile. For instance, if you're active in market research, then you have to combine E and G. And if you're in advertising or customer support, obviously the E and S. And if you're setting up a booth in a fair, you know, this kind of special operations, then obviously the E and the O. The same logic applies to other kinds of functions like finance or operations, IT. These three are G functions, meaning they have to be very well structured, very well organized. But it's not just G, right? So if you're, for instance, in charge of corporate finance or financial planning, of course, the G has to be there, but also the E to look forward and try something new. When it's just routine processes like accounting, budgeting, and so on. So that's more of a GO position on the EGOS map. And if it's interaction with investors, with banks, and so on, so more of a relationship, obviously the G and the S. Same thing for administrative services or support services, typically more on the O side, and even sales. For instance, sales, if you're in a B2B personal sale environment, then you should focus on the social and entrepreneur, because B2B sales require lots of effort, lots of determination to ensure that even though you hear the no several times, you keep on pushing until you eventually get some sales. Whereas in a B2C environment, so business to consumer, it has to be more relaxed, so more of a S and O interaction. And if you're selling really complex products, like technical products or services, then the G is required to explain technically how the product or services work and to clarify some detailed questions, right? So, for instance, we had a chance to work with a multinational company that had changed the technical leader to become the sales leader. But he was very shy. He was a GO. And he didn't feel comfortable about going out to companies and arguing and negotiating, because that was very far away from his own nature. You know, his personality was GO, and the sense of negotiating and closing the deal and being hard-headed was more on the E side, which he was not. So he used to stay in the company and make some plans for his salespeople to go out and meet the customers. But obviously, this was not the reason why he had been put in this position. So we helped him realize that actually he didn't have to go all the way to the E side to sell. He could be just some kind of ambassador for the company and move from GO to GS, because he was so technically strong, and the company anyway was selling IT software, which was complex and needed some explanations. So he was, let's say, the first to go in, to open the doors, to explain technically how the systems worked and how the company was structured. And obviously, once they got a foothold in the company, somebody else took over and went all the way to the negotiation and final sale. And he was very happy to go and be an ambassador, because this was much closer to his own personality. So as you can see, this is not a question of whether I'm right or wrong. The question is whether I fit the functional requirement that I'm supposed to perform. And once I realize where my function is, and then I look at my adapted personality, it's actually easy to realize, okay, I'm not so far away, or I'm very far away. I have to go in that direction step by step. I don't jump to the new position. I just slowly enhance my own characteristics to get closer to the desired position of the function, right? HR, by the way, is also a social-based function. So let's take a look at the lower level team and see how does this apply. Let's consider a typical department, in this case a bank branch, which is a small department in a bank, right? So as I mentioned, all functions are easy to typify. So in a bank branch, the roles of a branch manager, a deputy manager, account managers, and even the teller can be easily, positioned on the EGOS map, and it's quite easy then to realize whether actual people are doing the job in the right way. It's not a question of competence. It's always a question of performance. Are they performing it well? Take a look at this bank branch. So just by looking at this bank branch, it's easy to realize that they're not doing well, because they're not in the right positions for their individual function. So they cannot do their own work well, and they don't work well as a team. So let's see what are the requirements, the functional requirements for their own functions. So the deputy manager is the person who should be in charge of the processes, getting all the signatures, making sure that all the paperwork is finished so that nothing is missing. The corporate account manager is a salesperson, so he or she should be in between ES, SE, and a little bit of SG for more technical issues. And the individual account manager, so more for individual customers, is a B2C salesperson. So he or she should be between S and O and a little bit of SG for more technical issues. And the teller should be more relational when customers are in the bank, so more between S and O, and more of a routine process orientation, GO, OG, when they have to deal with back office tasks. And obviously the bank branch manager should be more on the ES side, making the connection between some high-level corporate customers and the back office and the processes with the deputy manager. So now that you realize what are the functional requirements of each individual role, then you look back at the bank branch and you understand why they were in complete disorder and very low performance. Well, actually, this bank branch, after they've realized how to work better with each other and also how to do their individual work better, they won the prize for the highest growth because they had come from a very low basis to a much better position. They were not the best branch in the bank, but the jump was phenomenal. And this is what we used to see. We used to see amazing performance improvements once people who are already competent start actually working well with each other and performing their roles better and interacting with others better and making sure that they complement each other. So, as you've understood by now, top-level teams are driven by relationships among the different leaders in a company, whereas lower-level teams are driven by the functions, by the requirements of the job that they actually perform. So you have to read top-level teams and read lower-level teams in a different way, because you expect leadership at the highest level to be much more driven by the way that they interact with each other, by the hidden dynamics of the top-level members of any company. So continuing in the analysis of lower levels functional teams, it's interesting to realize that the personality distribution in a team usually reflects the type of processes or projects that they are best suited to. So if you have a balanced distribution with people from all EGOS profiles, this usually means that they can address complex, multidisciplinary processes or projects, and they can deal with some intermediate level of uncertainty and get strong results for the medium to long term. Now, if your distribution on the EGOS map, if your team is mostly E, so there's an entrepreneur preponderance, that means that they are best suited to undertake complex projects, typically in an uncertain environment, and they can have a very high strategic impact, and they will mostly be focused on medium-term results. Whereas if you have more of a G preponderance, many governors on the team, that will likely lead the team to be able to conduct complex processes, so processes that go on for many years. Those processes must be better structured, better understood in all details, and they will have a very strong organizational impact, and the results will probably prove to be successful for the medium and long term. Whereas if you have an O preponderance, so many O's, typically that allows the team to undertake more simple processes with a strong practical impact, so something that can be done, executed by people with an O characteristic, strong O characteristics, and the results will be mostly short-term. And if you look at socials, if there's a team with many socials, once again, this allows them to work really well in simple projects with a strong motivational impact, so something that really requires people to get engaged, and they will really do an amazing work, but once again, with a short-term, sometimes medium-term impact on results. So keep in mind that if you are dealing with different types of people in a team, you should realize what is best for these teams. Should I aim for something that they're not really well suited for? Maybe they will fail. But if I realize that these ones can play the game, so to speak, better in this way, maybe that's how I should set my own team orientation. On the other hand, now that you realize how different personalities impact on the team processes and projects, you can actually structure the team in advance to undertake a specific process or project. So you can build the team around the needs of the project or processes that you have in the company. Now, this is also true when you're looking at the different roles that people can play. There are 9 roles that are very well defined for different teams, and once you realize what kind of people you have on the team, you can understand immediately what kind of role they will unconsciously play. Typically, an E or ES will be more of a shaper. They like to shape the project, shape the future of the team. Whereas EO, EG tend to be more of a specialist. They like to focus on few topics and they want to be the best in those areas. A typical GE, GS is very good at finishing, at making sure that everything at the end is really well structured. Doesn't mean that they are not good at the beginning and in the middle, but they help structure the project or the process, and especially at the end, they review everything and they make it really top-notch. And if you're thinking about, or if you're having a team G or GO, this one will be more of an evaluator. Maybe he or she will not change what is there, but he will or she will assess, oh, this is better, this is not as good, which is typical of the G characteristics. And if you have a pure O or an OG, there will be the implementers that will put it in place. And if you have more of an OE and OS, they will be more likely to take a little bit more risks and to improvise. So to try to do things their own way. The other ones, the implementers, will pretty much follow the orientation from above. And SGSO person will be a good collaborator. He or she will be part of a team and help in whatever circumstances is required by the team. Whereas an SE or pure S will try to be also a resourcer, meaning try to get more people on board or try to find more resources for the team. So will be more outward looking. So as you can see, once again, different people, due to their own personalities, can help the team become effective in different ways. So let's try to build from the outset a team that is balanced, that helps, achieve the goals of the process or project by gathering the right kinds of profiles that we know in advance will have specific positions on the EGOS map and have unconsciously play certain roles. Now, obviously, the 9th and last role is that of the coordinator, who is in charge of making sure that everybody works well together. And this coordinator will have to be very flexible. That's why it's positioned pretty much in the middle of the EGOS map.